Hello, and welcome to another edition of BNEWS In Depth. I'm your host, Rich Hosford. In the wake of the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor at law enforcement, many state legislators began eyeing police reform, and Massachusetts was no exception. Late last year, the legislature passed and Governor Charlie Baker signed an act relative to justice, equity, and accountability in police in the Commonwealth, and that will be the subject of this month's show. We'll take it in two parts. Up first will be my talk with State Rep Ken Gordon about the details of the bill, followed by local police reaction from Burlington Police Chief Michael Kent. Let's start with my conversation with State Rep Ken Gordon.
And I'm now joined by State Rep Ken Gordon to talk to us about the police reform bill. Ken, thank you for taking some time this month to sit down and talk to us about this important issue. And I just wanted to start off, kind of big picture, why you thought this was, an important thing to do at this time.
Well, first of all, Rich, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate you shedding some attention to this topic. And this was an important bill that we brought out of the legislature and that was signed by the governor at the end of the last session. I think that we're all aware that this past year we had the convergence of not only a pandemic healthcare crisis, but also a civil rights crisis. Many people here in Massachusetts and across our district became focused on the fact that across the country, there were several instances, and it wasn't just this year, but there were several instances where people who are Black, Latino, people of color were treated differently. Many would say unfairly, I would say unfairly, in their interaction with law enforcement. And we had component parts of a policing bill filed previously, and we were looking at all of these parts. But because we saw the public reaction to all of this at this time, it became apparent that the time to act was now. The fact that a George Floyd or a Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, that didn't happen in Massachusetts was somewhat beside the point. I spoke to people in my district. I spoke to police, and I also spoke to residents. And I was pleased to hear that residents who are from marginalized communities, Black, Latino, and so forth, they didn't tell me of many experiences with police in this district in which they felt singled out or treated differently, but they all told me that they had experiences with police in other places in Massachusetts where they absolutely knew that they were treated differently on the basis of the color of their skin. And so I know that even if our residents might say, well, the Bedford or Burlington police don't experience these or don't really deserve to be overseen any more than they had. That might be very true, and I would agree with that. But that still doesn't answer the question of how about across the Commonwealth, which is what we did.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily necessary for this exact district, but overall, sort of like statewide, places vary from place to place as far as police conduct goes.
Yeah, Rich, we're really lucky. I want to jump in really quick. We're lucky. We have two police departments. Well, Burlington has a terrific police department. I represent Bedford as well, where we have an attitude. It's the culture of these two departments that respect everybody, no matter the color of their skin. And this is what I've heard over and over. I've seen it because I've interacted with our police and talked to them, but also talking to our residents. But that really doesn't fully address the need for a bill like this, because we are in a Commonwealth and this is not a town ordinance. This is state law.
Right, exactly. So I want to get into some of the particulars, of what's actually in it, just to sort of let people, kind of better understand it. Kind of first of all, in sort of big picture, how does this kind of change oversight of police departments and police officers in the state?
That's a great place to start, Rich, because what it does is it creates a commission called the Post Commission, Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission, that's largely made up of civilians. So it's there is a police presence on the commission, but it's an independent commission, and what it does is it oversees discipline. It oversees who's complying with the rules, so that people in Massachusetts can have confidence that if there's an issue involving a police officer, they can bring it to someone who's not being judged just by their peers. That there's an objective oversight commission in there. So what the Post Commission does is it serves as the civil enforcement agency to certify, restrict, revoke, or suspend certification for an officer. They have authority to do that, and it's an important role. Obviously, it's the ultimate role in how we're overseeing our policing in Massachusetts. The other things they can do, I can get into more of the details, but this is essentially what we're going to have now is a commission to take that responsibility. They also, I'm sorry, one more thing is they also are looking into recommending other regulations with respect to policing that are not in the bill yet.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think it's important to have civilian oversight rather than keep it within the police field or environment?
Well, when we speak to our people from these marginalized communities, we hear that there's just a lack of trust. They believe that if they're pulled over, there's a resident in Bedford, for example, who said he stopped counting when he got up to about 100 times, not in Bedford or Burlington, but in Massachusetts, an African-American lawyer. And that resonates with me. I've only been pulled over a handful of times in my whole life, and people shouldn't be treated differently because they look differently. And so now someone in that situation who before believed, well, if I complain, like, where do I go? Because it's just one it's one profession policing itself. And now I can go to someone to an organization that may have a more objective point of view.
And on that topic of sort of accountability, talk about the changes in the bill that in regards to qualified immunity, because I think that's a big issue with police departments sort of kind of across the country.
I also think that that's an issue that's largely misunderstood. Even in the debate that we were having, I still believe that it's an issue that's largely misunderstood. Mm-hmm. I'm a trial lawyer, and I get involved in business disputes, but the issue with qualified immunity is that if a police officer is acting within the scope of the police officer's job, and there's some negligence, something goes wrong, they're not going to get personally sued. I should say, if they're personally sued, it won't go anywhere. The defense will be, I was acting with the scope of my job. So if a police officer is driving in a reasonable pursuit and there's an auto accident, right, there's a third party that's hurt, it's the police department that could get sued for negligence. It's that insurance company that would pay for any damage that was caused, not the officer. So qualified immunity is really directed at, and the conversation directed at instances where a police officer goes beyond the scope of their responsibility. That's the only time that an officer could be held liable. So qualified immunity does not extend to law enforcement officer who violates a person's right to bias-free professional policing if that conduct results in the officer's decertification by the Post Commission, right? Okay. So they only have to worry about it if the Post Commission finds that they violated the rules. They stay within the rules. They don't answer for that. I started by telling you I'm a trial lawyer from a business point of view. Lawyers don't look to individuals to sue them. Individuals would never have the money to satisfy the claims that they would bring. They look to what we call the deep pocket, which is the insured municipality.
Right. So in order for an actual individual to be sort of held personally responsible for something, it has to be an action that goes far beyond what the scope of their training or the scope of their responsibility.
Right. They violated their civil rights, and they were disciplined, but they were decertified. Not just disciplined. They were decertified by the Post Commission. They had to do something that went way beyond the scope of what a reasonable police officer would have done.
Right. Well, I think that makes sense.
We also established a commission to study this further.
Right, yeah. And again, that goes back to the sort of civilian oversight that you were talking about before.
Right.
So a couple other, parts of the bill. One of them is a ban. I don't know if ban is the right word, but a restriction on the use of technology that can use facial recognition. Why was that sort of, deemed important enough to be put into this bill?
So this was actually a compromise that we reached with the governor at the end, because for him to sign the bill, you've got to have the legislature and the governor signing on. So the issue here is that we have surveillance cameras all over the place now. And law enforcement uses surveillance cameras all the time. And what you can do, and what's a useful tool to law enforcement, is that you get a picture of a person at the scene of a crime, and then you can use surveillance cameras that were located nearby to track their movement. Okay? So the issue is simply that you have to have a warrant to do that, because the organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union are saying, okay, you can have a peaceful protest, say at the Boston Common, and you can have surveillance cameras without a warrant. It's an invasion of your privacy to have someone looking through all these pictures to see who they might recognize without a warrant. If you have a warrant, because now you go to a judge and you say, I have some reason to want to look through this because crime has been committed. There's a person out there who may be dangerous. You get the warrant, you're able to do that. Okay.
I guess that will be a big, I know that's not Massachusetts, but I'm sure that facial recognition sort of technology is going to be a big part of the Capitol building storming, that investigation that's ongoing right now by the FBI.
Well, think about the marathon bombing. Remember that we had pictures of the marathon bomber putting the bomb in the trash can, and we had pictures of that bomb. Well, the police then would go get a warrant and say, I need to use that picture. I want to use that picture not only to do my research, because there's a bomber, the public safety is absolutely at risk now. Any judge would issue that warrant. And then they could go to the registry and match it up with a name, assuming that the person has an ID, state-run ID.
So one of the other things in this bill, and probably reflection from the incident with George Floyd, is a ban on chokeholds. Talk about, how that is addressed in this.
Yeah, so as you said, Rich, this does ban chokeholds, the use of chokeholds. And as you said, we all have the picture of the officer with his knee on George Floyd's throat. That's not going to happen here. We ban it. We do not want to see the sort of offensive, which is to say that a police officer offensively using a restraint on someone by their neck, by their throat, and so it's banned.
Ben, you mentioned lethal force sort of as a bigger picture part of the bill. So what is addressed in this bill as far as that? Like what, regulations does it have as far as what must be done before, that ultimate step can be taken?
Well, so before that ultimate step is taken, an officer has to use attempts to de-escalate. It's only appropriate if those attempts have either failed or in the totality of the circumstances, it's just not feasible. So it's a last resort. I would think it's always been a last resort, but this codifies that, right? The use of, you can't shoot a firearm into a fleeing motor vehicle, right? That's kind of makes sense. It limits the use of tear gas, rubber pellets, or dogs. De-escalation has to be required first. So it doesn't eliminate it. It's just, again, these are tools of last resort. And it also requires that a police officer has to intervene and report if that officer sees another officer using physical force beyond that which is necessary or reasonable based on the totality of the circumstances.
Well, that's interesting. So it, kind of keeps other officers somewhat responsible for the intervening if they see something that they know is sort of an action that is illegal.
Right. Remember the George Floyd
Right.
video that
bystanders.
We saw other officers standing around. They said they felt that they were intimidated from doing anything because this is a superior officer to them. Now they don't have to feel that way because they know that they're required to intervene. There's no exception for rank.
Interesting. Oh, that's, I think, an important sort of, thing to put into the law enforcement community. Keeping on with, sort of things that we're seeing nationally that, we're bringing home into this bill. Talk about, what the bill addresses as far as no-knock warrants goes.
Right. So the bill says that a no-knock warrant can be issued by a judge. So you can't do it unless there's a judge that's issued it. Only if there's an affidavit that's given to the judge, and it's got to establish probable cause that the officer believes that if they announce their presence, then the lives of others would be endangered. So essentially, the only time you can get a no-knock warrant is if the officer can tell the judge, if I knock, someone's going to be endangered. The final bill that was signed by the governor also says that that there's an exception if there's a child there, that you might be actually putting that child into more risk. So there's a little complication for that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, situations where maybe like domestic situations where if you knock, somebody's going to go kind of ballistic and harm people within the home or something like that.
Yeah, if you're holding a hostage.
Right.
And the hostage may be a child or a domestic situation, then at that point that's an exception as well. But basically, it's that.
And I noticed one other part of the bill, and this is sort of like the last thing that I want to drill down on before we sort of take a little reflection on the bigger picture, is they removed a mandate for officers to be, in all school departments. So what was sort of kind of the reasoning behind that?
Well, we're fortunate, again, in our district. We have resource officers who really add to the experience, the safety, and security of our students. They're involved, and our students really benefit from that. But there are some districts where the resource officer is seen as a challenge to some students. And so what this does is it puts some restrictions and just some policy in place with respect to the school resource officer. It really won't affect us here. We can still do what we do. Mm-hmm. But in some of the other school districts, it puts some safety policies in place. Okay.
Now, the way I want to end this interview, because anytime there's action taken that impacts police departments in any way whatsoever, there's always going to be some people who are like, oh, you're, compromising public safety or doing, limiting what, law and order. And I know that's not the intent here, but I want to give you the opportunity as somebody who, voted in favor of this, just to sort of big picture say, to the people watching, why this is an important and non-law enforcement, restricting sort of, compromise.
Well, we've been talking, Rich, for the past 10 or 15 minutes or so. And I think that most of the provisions of this bill that I've explained to you either sound probably to your viewers like common sense. Most of them sound like things that the police were doing anyway. And with respect to this district, they are things the police are doing anyway. Using your firearm as a last resort. You would think that's happening anyway. Tear gas, rubber bullet, last resort. Not choking someone. you would think that's the case. You would also think that's the case that another police officer would step up if they saw a fellow police officer doing such a thing as choking someone. So it really just codifies what we want to make sure these minimal standards are for policing. Most important part of it is the post commission. That was work done by the governor's office for a year or more. And we were looking into doing that before any of these incidents that happen nationally occurred. And so I think this is important for people to feel like they have a place to go, so that there's civilian oversight for issues that they're afraid there may be no place for them, no ear that they have to listen to them and hear them out. I think there's adequate representation all the way through. It's a compromise piece of legislation. We can keep going on it, but I think it's a very good step as we move forward to make sure that our expectations for our police officers are clear. And as we read the bill, I just think that our police officers, looking at this, I realize that from a political standpoint, it can be difficult because it seems like you're taking a side, but really, I think that our departments, when they really look at it, see that we're not expecting more of them than we've expected all along.
Well, very good. And there's a lot in this bill, and I appreciate you taking the time today to kind of go through it step by step and explaining the different parts of it. And I think it's important for people to kind of understand what's in it, at a more granular level than just seeing that there's a police reform bill. So thank you very much for coming on and talking about it.
Thank you very much, Rich. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Stay safe. Do you enjoy, and all your viewers.
Yes, you as well. Thank you.
Now that we have the details of the bill, let's go to my conversation with Police Chief Michael Kent to get local reaction. And I am now joined by Chief Michael Kent of the Burlington Police Department. Chief, thanks for taking some time and talking through some of the details of this bill with us.
Well, I'm glad to be with you, Rich.
So, just in general, what are your thoughts just about the state legislature sort of weighing in on police activity, police sort of philosophy, police rules?
It's interesting. Reform. You hear everyone. No one has a problem with police reform. What is reform? I look at it as something you should do regularly in any department business where you're reviewing best practices, changing with the times. If you're behind the times in something, making those appropriate changes. So I don't think you talk to any police chief that has a problem with police reform. I will say I thought it was an extremely rushed process. And the fact that the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, didn't hold any hearings with subject matter experts, I thought was problematic. I had myself and my staff had numerous conversations with our rep and state senator, and they listened, but I'm not sure if they heard what we were saying. But at the end of the day, it was passed. I think the fact that the legislature, there were 66 no votes in the House of Representatives says a lot. Usually everything down there is just about unanimous. Governor made some tweaks, it was passed, and it's the law. As police officers, we don't make the law, we enforce it. And right now we're at the stage where we're going through, figuring out the nuances, what needs to be done by July 1, what needs to be done by the end of 2021, things of that nature. So we're navigating through it. Many things in this bill are not new. Frankly, the post system of certifying police officers is something that the Mass chiefs have wanted for years, and it fell on deaf ears in the legislature. So that's not an idea that came from the legislature. We've been asking for it for years. we've never taught chokeholds. We've always taught a duty to intervene. We don't shoot a moving vehicle. So many of these things were already practiced by the Burlington PD, and I think most police departments.
Yeah, so do you get the sense that, maybe this was sort of more a reaction to like a national sort of issue rather than what was actually happening locally?
Exactly. I think you're spot on. We're very fortunate. Massachusetts is it's interesting. There's not a lot of money put to police training in Massachusetts. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, they had to put a $2 surcharge on every rental car, and that $2 surcharge went to police training just to try and get us some adequate funding. Despite that, I think the departments in Massachusetts are light speed ahead of many other parts of the country.
Yeah, and just on that, because there's been so much discussion sort of about policing, and especially in the last year or so. When you look at the the national news and you see sort of some of the responses to Black Lives Matter, we see George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. What are your thoughts on just sort of in general, the difference between policing in different parts of the country?
Well, again, I'm just going off what I see on the news. I can't speak to what LAPD does or Chicago PD or Minneapolis PD. But certainly the scenes we saw this past summer, both by the police in the case of George Floyd and, some of the cities burning were not things I don't think anyone enjoyed seeing. So hopefully, and I think, police reform is sweeping the country. Hopefully we can, particularly other parts of the country, get things in a better place for the police officers and the citizens in general.
Now, one of the things in the bill is sort of, it changes some of the standards for what's called, qualified immunity. What are the implications of that?
Well, they've got a committee to study qualified immunity. The implications are, if they did away with it, you'd be subject to a lawsuit on pretty much anything you did as a police officer. And I think it actually covers firefighters, EMTs, and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. They put a committee together, I believe, in this bill. They're going to study it. What I found problematic is they don't have any police officers on the committee to study it. This bill actually has 18 separate committees. And as far as I know, nothing's been done to start any of them. But you look at the Qualified Immunity Committee with no police officer on it. Think about other licensing agencies, doctors. The whole panel's made up of doctors, lawyers. All the panel's made up of lawyers. I'm sure there's other licensing agencies that are made up of the people that practice what they're licensing. So the qualified immunity was a little disturbing that they didn't feel the need to have a police officer on that. But I'm choosing my words carefully here. Mm-hmm. I found with our legislature, it seems like a lot of people became experts on police tactics, use of force, using our good friend Google. And again, it goes back to, I wish they'd have taken the time at hearings and had subject matter experts come in and just perhaps give a clearer picture of a lot of the things that take place, why they do, and why they do take place.
So the sense I'm getting is that you kind of wish there was a little bit more involvement of actual police officers in this process.
I think we had a chance to really put some thought into a really comprehensive police reform bill. And again, I think it was rushed through at light speed. When you look at some of the other bills, that you might refer to as controversial in nature, how long it took to get them through because they were studied and things of that nature. This bill was done at light speed. And again, there were no hearings. I offered to our senator and representative, I have two guys that are tremendously well trained in defensive tactics and things of that nature. And, I offered them up if they had any questions, and I don't think they didn't speak to either one of them. So again, we go back to Google and everyone's an expert on police tactics and use of force.
Yeah, we've all seen The Wire. We know what we're talking about. One of the things, I know we don't, like you said, it was sort of a big bill. There's a lot of details. Not everything has sort of been hashed out yet. But one of the things that kind of caught my eye was a ban on facial recognition software. I didn't know what kind of impact that would have on, your operations, your ability to conduct your job.
In a town like Burlington, it's not something that we use. We don't have the software for that.
Okay.
I would imagine in the larger urban areas, it may be something they use. I do know it was referred to a lot a couple of weeks ago with the Capitol riots, identifying those people.
Mm-hmm.
I just look at it, it's a modern tool for law enforcement. I do understand, in my limited knowledge of it, there are some issues with it as to false positives and things of that nature. But in a town like Burlington, that's really not going to affect us.
Yeah. Okay. Again, something more on TV than perhaps what's actually done locally. So kind of broadening the subject a little bit, I know that, in Burlington, there's been a real push in the police department to strive for greater diversity. Talk about why that's important to you.
Well, that's one. I'm proud to say I believe the Burlington PD is the most diverse department in town. And since we've gotten out of civil service, we've been able to broaden our diversity, hiring the best, but broadening our diversity. And I think it's important to reflect the population you serve. And that includes our daytime population, which, as we know, skyrockets, at least pre-COVID, it skyrocketed with a melting pot of different ethnicities, religions, et cetera, coming into town. So we've done well. I would like to see us continue on that trend. Matter of fact, we're going to be giving a test probably, we haven't hammered the date, but in the spring, and we're hoping to have a diverse pool to choose from there. I actually just put an ad in a minority police officers magazine in hopes of attracting a more diverse pool. But we've been good. We can always do better. We're striving to do better, but I'm proud of where we're at now. And that's actually, it's interesting, that dovetails into the police reform bill. There's a section in that bill where the post commission needs to interview the people you hire, which to me, that was one of the issues with civil service. They didn't know what's best for Burlington. So I find it interesting that's, they can go through a hiring process, interview panel, interview with the town administrator and myself, and get sent back to Boston to be interviewed. And I guess in theory, they could say, no, they're not qualified to be a police officer. So that's just one of the things in this bill that I kind of scratch my head at.
Yeah.
But we have a very good, I'm proud of our process. And again, we'll be giving a test in April, and I hope it'll be interesting if we have large numbers with everything that's going on in policing.
Well, it seems like you normally do.
Yeah.
Usually you have quite a few candidates for every position that you have open.
Yeah. We're very fortunate. This town has been very good to the Burlington Police Department, so there's a lot of opportunities. I think I can say we're one of the departments in Metro Boston that people are looking at that want to come to be police officers. Because it's an interesting community to work in. We have good equipment. We're a busy department. So prior to all this, we had very good numbers. We shall see going forward if the undertone with policing will lower our numbers. I don't know. I hope not.
Right. Just a couple last things. I know, so, obviously, part of this is, the reform bill is trying to, limit bad actors among police officers. What kind of, part of the hiring process, when you're doing the interviews, do you kind of use to sort of like try to screen for potential, bad actors?
Well, with anyone we hire, we have a psychological exam, a fairly significant one that they need to go through. The interview panel, it starts off with an interview with the command staff, several patrolmen, where everyone gets the same questions, but it's scenario based, a lot of the questions, just to get an idea how they would handle things. Then whoever makes the cut there would go to the town administrator and I for an interview, which is a little less stressful than the one they went through prior. But then the big thing is the background check. Mm-hmm. We have officers specifically trained in going to someone's background, knocking on doors, digging through social media, looking for any red flag that could come up to that would cause concern. And it was either in this group or the last group where we had a conditional offer of employment to a young man, and we found something in his background, and we had to pull that back and tell him he wasn't going to be a police officer in Burlington. So it does happen.
Okay.
And don't kid yourself. These police officers know they're going to be working with this person that gets hired probably for 30 years. So you don't want to be hiring someone of questionable character because you're going to be working right alongside of them. No one hates a bad cop more than a good cop.
Well, I think that's a very important thing to emphasize. I think it's great to hear that because, yeah, I mean, that sort of says it all right there.
Yeah.
Probably, just a couple last things. I know in Burlington, there's a huge, in the police department, there's a big emphasis on training. Obviously some of that is like, training as far as tactics or whatever, but also training as far as, how to mitigate situations and sort of bring the tension down. Talk about, some of the training, procedures you have in place and what their goal is.
Well, it's another thing in this bill that we already do is de-escalation. And we were one of the first departments in Massachusetts, I believe in 2015, we sent a group of officers, myself included, to New Orleans, where the Police Executive Research Forum was putting on a training on de-escalation and kind of a new form of de-escalation. And it's something that we have taught ever since. So that's a big one. I don't think, no police officer wants to be wrestling around with someone if you can de-escalate the situation and bring someone down. And our officers our times of hands-on with the public, other than, just simple handcuffing, is very, very rare. Our officers do a great job in talking situations down and calming the situation. It's very rare when I come in and read a report where the police officer is wrestling around with someone because they wouldn't comply. Our guys are very good at de-escalating situations. That goes back to our training. And another piece that we got in, we're still working the bugs out, Rich, because I want to have you up to do a story on it, is we got a simulator, a police simulator that we put up in our mezzanine that is actual scenarios that the police officer, use of force scenarios, can use. And it's really a state-of-the-art system, and I think it's going to help us continue to improve with de-escalation, making the right decisions, verbalizing to people. It'll be an interesting story when you come out. I think you'll be quite impressed.
I will be there anytime to cover that. It sounds interesting. I look forward to it.
So I know there's a lot in the bill. Is there anything that we haven't touched upon that you kind of think is significant?
There's a lot of significant pieces in that bill. I think we generally covered it. We'll deal with it. As I say, I have a training next week, myself and the deputy, Zoom training for 6 hours. Give you an idea how deep this bill goes. It's a 6-hour training on it, on what as police departments we need to be doing. And I know it's sold out very quickly. So, there's gonna be a few man hours tied up in getting together what the Post Commission needs and requires. Interestingly enough, the Post Commission goes into effect July 1, and there's been no movement on setting a commission up yet, so I'm not sure if that's going to be up and running by July 1. But we'll make do. I'm very fortunate. I got a great group of officers here, and although we may not agree with everything that's in the bill, it is the law, and we will follow it. And I think I can proudly say we'll probably be one of the best departments following it in the area.
Well, I know there's always been a lot of praise for the Burlington Police Department, so we appreciate everything that you do, and I appreciate you taking some time to talk, through this bill today.
Always, anything you need, Rich.
And I look forward to checking out that simulator.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and we will talk to you soon.
All right, Rich. Thank you.
So there you have it. Police reform in Massachusetts. I'd like to thank my guests, State Rep Ken Gordon and Burlington Police Chief Michael Kent. I'd also like to thank all of you for watching. We'll be back next month with another edition of BNEWS In Depth, so stay tuned.